Now the captain says citizens must. It's been nearly 4 years since Ibrahim Traoré took over Burkina Faso in a coup after toppling another junta. Now the captain says citizens must forget about democracy. Normally, if you talk to an African about democracy, if someone just comes up to you and starts talking to you about democracy, you'd better run because democracy kills. Is that what democracy is? Is that what we want? Democracy, children are being killed, democracy, bombs are being dropped, women are being killed, people are being killed, hospitals are being destroyed, civilians are being killed.
All right, welcome to This Week in Africa. Did Traoré reject democracy or was his statement misrepresented? This is your weekly live stream where we talk about all things Africa related for those who are thinking about the continent. Before we get into today's stories, we have a number of stories we're going to go through, actually. I'll just mention them. One, we're going to talk about what Traoré said and the meaning behind what he said. We're also going to talk about Zimbabwe's plan to scrap elections, Cameroon's successor, Paul Biya, who is probably the oldest president in the world, if I'm not mistaken, Sudan and the RSF, how the Iran war is impacting them, Ibrahim Mahama, the president of Ghana's brother, his private jet departs Ghana for conversion into a national air ambulance. And then lastly, we're going to talk about third-party country deportations. But before we get into today's stories, let's do some introductions. So I will turn it over to my co-host before I introduce myself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gloria Ayo. I am the founder of Diaspora Station. The goal is basically to bridge the gap between Africa and its diaspora and just inform people and also entertain. But as usual, very happy to be back.
Absolutely. And I'm Joe Hataga, founder of Authentic African Media. Our goal is to help people do one of three things: visit, move, and invest in Africa. And also we spend a lot of time educating people on the news and what's happening today, so that you can be well informed before you make the decision to do any one of those three things. So today we are digging more into this story that over the last 4 or 5 days has captured the attention of many people in independent media and Western media. And this is the story of the interview that Ibrahim Traoré had done on the 2nd of April. So he discussed several critical shifts in Burkina Faso's government and national priorities. So the conversation moved beyond his rejection of democracy to address specific administrative and economic strategies for the country. So, of course, we know that there's been plenty of reporting specifically on that one statement, but we're going to go through a little bit more about what he talked about, and then we'll look at some opposing viewpoints as well. So, one, alternative governance model. He formally declared Burkina Faso is a people's progressive revolution. He argued that democracy is a result of development rather than its cause, and that no country has ever truly developed through a democratic system. So there were some national priorities. He stated that his administration would focus on national security and food sovereignty rather than specifically organizing elections. He emphasized that working a standard 6 to 8 hour days is insufficient for a developing nation and suggested a more rigorous national work ethic. And also recently, he did talk about the fact that there's been a lot of challenges with many jobs requiring 3 to 5 years experience when many people don't have any experience. So how do you gain the experience if every job requires 3 to 5 years of experience? So those are some of the national priorities around work that he's looking to change internally within the country. He did, of course, have some criticism of political systems. He did mention Western's influence and regional blocs. He criticized the African Union and other regional bodies for being influenced by foreign powers and remaining passive during continental crises. He especially likened Western-style democracy to slavery and cited destabilization of Libya as proof that foreign-imposed systems lead to loss of life. And then, of course, security vigilance. The interview included a call for increased security vigilance among citizens to counter regional instability and ongoing insurgencies. Now, I'm going to play a little bit more of this video to give you guys a little bit more of a view in terms of how Western media was actually depicting this story. And in fact, this is in Africa focused platform, and you can see how the main focus of the story was on that particular statement. So we'll play the rest of this video, and then we'll have a contradictory viewpoint to how Western media has been portraying this. So we'll get into that, and then we'll have some more commentary in a moment.
Is that what democracy is? They act as if they don't see it. There they are with their eyes closed. Young Africans must understand that this notion of democracy is false. It is false. It is just a stick that people hold and use against Africans and certain peoples. That is all. So we must forget this notion of democracy. We must embrace the revolutionary spirit. Since seizing power, Ibrahim Traoré has tightened his grip on Burkina Faso, silencing dissent and dismantling democratic institutions. The military government has dissolved the Electoral Commission and banned all political parties, extending its rule by 5 years, despite earlier promises to return to democracy.
So as you guys can see, the framing of that was very specifically about that one statement, right? So I want to share something from Sovereign Media. Some of people we might be familiar with. They were known as the folks that brought us African Stream previously. Some of those same folks are there at Sovereign Media. So I want to give you guys their viewpoint on this. So first of all, what you see on your screen here is a political cartoon. And what it says is from a 2-hour interview with Burkina Faso's leader, Ibrahim Traoré. The Western mainstream media extracted an excerpt in particular. And what that excerpt was is people need to forget about democracy. Democracy kills. Look at Libya. It's a prime example right next to us. We're not interested in democracy as these people show us democracy. And then it depicts a person listening to the radio and hearing the statement saying, hey, listen, Traoré hates democracy. I know what kind of democracy he's talking about. So what this person is saying, they're saying he hates democracy. And then this person on the right is basically the kind of depicting someone in Burkina Faso saying, here's what democracy looks like. And then, of course, you know, this is meant to be the United States dropping what looks to be a bomb, which I think is probably depicting what we saw with Libya, even though bombs weren't used, but more specifically what we're seeing in Iran, et cetera, right? So that's what this political cartoon is depicting. Now, here is what the folks at Sovereign Media said. In a state television interview on the 2nd of April, 2026, Burkina Faso's leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, delivered a blunt rejection of Western-styled bourgeois democracy. We're not interested in democracy as these people show us democracy. Democracy on our lives. Democracy is not for us. That was the quote from Ibrahim Traoré from this interview. Traoré framed his critique not merely as an attack on the political system, but as a rejection of the neo-colonial economic order that often accompanies it. He argued that where Western powers try to establish democracy in the world, it's always accompanied by bloodshed. Now, that's a quote from Ibrahim Traoré, written by Sovereign Media. You know, for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, they go on to say the push for multi-party elections often functions as a tool to install pliable leaders who prioritize foreign extraction over national development. They took another quote from him saying, the truth is, he said, a real politician is someone who embodies every vice, a liar, a psychopath, and a smooth talker. So what they're saying is that's what they're saying is normally what a politician is. And of course, Ibrahim Traoré doesn't consider himself what like it was a traditional politician. So they go on to say that Traoré's rhetoric is supported by records of African leaders who exploited their nations. They mentioned that in Angola, Eduardo dos Santos, 38-year rule, privatized state oil reserves with the Luanda leaks, revealing that over 400 companies siphoned billions, while most Angolans lived on less than $2 per day. They also go on to mention in Cameroon, the pro-French president Paul Biya has governed for 43 years. Biya's rule has been marked by disputed elections, entrenched corruption, and long-standing concerns over how state resources, including oil reserves, are managed. And then lastly, to say the question for bourgeois democracy remains deeply contested across the African continent, where the best funded campaigns, often tied to foreign capital, take power and then serve the interests rather than the people who elected them. So now, for those of you guys watching, we'd love to hear what you think about both of these two approaches to this news story. And as you guys give your thoughts, Gloria, I'd love to start with you in your thoughts on these two approaches to this, as we look at this particular interview and how it was approached by Western media and some folks in the independent media.
Thank you, Joe. So again, I have to go back to that video we put out. I think it was almost a year ago when we talked about the entire world standing up for Ibrahim Traoré, but Western media looked away. In fact, some African media did look away. Mm-hmm. And that was very concerning to me because, as we said in the video, you're supposed to just report the story. Yep. However, when it's negativity, when it's conversations like this, you like to put out the information. Why aren't you balanced? You know, if you completely reject this government, then don't touch anything that has to do with him.
Right.
I think that would make way more sense because now your bias is showing clearly. And as we said then, you know, social media is the new media. So there's nothing you want to put out that will confuse people. But regarding the approaches now, well, let me first start with Captain Traoré's statement. I completely understand where it's coming from. Unfortunately, we've had so-called civilian governments who have not been for the people. We've had so-called democracies that are not for the people. I do remember an interview where Paul Kagame even said the West cannot determine what democracy should look like in Africa. I mean, to that, I would say then in that case, let's not practice. Let's know we're not practicing their style of democracy. Let's do our own thing constitutionally. So that way it seems more consistent. Sure. But what Traoré is basically saying is that a lot of our civilian leaders have failed us. I do want to add also that we have also had military leaders who have failed the people. I think at the end of the day, it boils down to the individual. You can make an impact regardless of what the style of leadership is. But I completely understand where it's coming from. At least in recent history, we've barely had any good civilian leader that has just made that impact. And you know, again, please be balanced in your report, in your covering of these stories, or completely leave these stories alone.
Absolutely. And I will say that, you know, two things, right? Not only does the Western media tend to focus on specific things that, you know, look, you have to think about this. Every outlet is trying their best to get eyeballs on the content that they do. And one thing that usually helps to get eyeballs is negative news and fear, right? If people are afraid of something, they're going to keep coming back to you to learn more about what they should be afraid of. Or, you know, people are just drawn to negative news more than positive news. So if they would have spoken about the fact that he talked about so many other things in that interview, they probably wouldn't have gotten as many clicks. And then what you also notice is that people follow what other people do, right? So certain people have gotten a ton of views, a ton of clicks on specifically saying that Traoré rejected democracy. Like if you type that into Google, the Google search engine, every single major news outlet says Traoré rejected democracy to some degree. And so you know that they are all following kind of the same system. They're just trying to get eyeballs. So I think that many of those folks, you know, if we want to be charitable to them, you know, it's many of them are just trying to get eyeballs. Now, also, many of them have agendas as well, right? So, you know, we can also speak to that as well. And not only do they have agendas, but those who have a viewpoint that opposes, you know, what Traoré is doing. Because a lot of times what you'll find is that depending on who the dictator is or the military leader is, or who the king is, or who the elected president is, that determines whether or not a specific group of people agree with them. So it's never really about any one of those styles of leadership where the West or Western media necessarily agree with or disagree with. It's more about whether or not they agree and go along with what the West wants, right? That's generally how it is reported, right? It almost always is based on their interest, not based on the interest of the people and what the people want. Because you'll find that many times Western media will underreport or positively report on some kind of leadership in another country where the people of that country don't agree with that leadership. And then in a case like this, where you have, you know, a large majority of the people who live in Burkina Faso who agree with their leadership, the people don't, it's not reported on by Western media. And you know, what we're seeing here is Fresh Lesh is saying, call it what it is, propaganda and conspiracy. And so that is what Fresh Lesh is saying. So yeah, I mean, look, I think that it's very important to report on all things happening in the world, but as you mentioned, it should be biased. Like all of what he's mentioned, it was a 2-hour plus interview, and that particular statement was one sentence. And if you notice that everywhere else you look for what was discussed in that interview, they only ever focused on that 1 or 2 lines, and then they discuss how he came to power, right? It's a template, right? He said this one thing, and then how he came to power, and he's also dissolved political parties, these kinds of things, as opposed to everything that was discussed. And so that's what we're talking about, and that's why we're talking about this today, because we wanted you all to know there was more to what was said in that interview. As I mentioned, it was a 2-hour-long interview, and it's hard to find the full interview, actually. It was on state-sponsored television, but most people just clipped up what they wanted to clip. So on that topic, you know, going from, you know, one person who has extended his military rule, right? And we'll see if it extends beyond that 5 years, to someone else who there's been some potential dispute on whether or not he should have done what he's done. So we're talking about the country of Zimbabwe, who actually recently was in a viral moment with American journalist Tucker Carlson, who actually asked him a ton of questions about their leadership, and you know, he had a lot of interesting things to say. So I want to find a video here that I can use to so that we can hear from him. But at least let me just give you some thoughts in the beginning. So first of all, fears are growing in opposition circles in Zimbabwe that the ruling ZANU-PF party is making a new grab for power as it presses ahead with constitutional amendments aimed at giving parliament, rather than voters, the right to elect the president and extend his term from 5 to 7 years. So a veteran opposition politician has said this this is a slow coup that is unfolding in Zimbabwe. Let me just, are you guys seeing my screen right now? Let me just make sure. Let me just add this to the screen. So this article from the BBC, this is what they're saying. But ZANU-PF in power since independence in 1980. So that would be 46 years, has vehemently defended the proposed changes. There's nothing that stops us to change, to go to another system that's less costly, less controversial, party official said. So the conflicting views highlight the deepened polarization that draft legislation aimed at changing the constitution has caused, pitting ZANU-PF and opposition supporters against each other. So just again, to give you guys the clear understanding what this is, the ruling party, who's been in power since 1980, has decided that the parliament will decide, one, to extend his term, and also if he can run, who can run for terms. If they allow the parliament to do that, that means the people don't get to do that. Now, some people will argue that people elect the parliament, but I think generally people elect all levels of government. So quick things that they'll mention: presidential elections held since 1990 are going to be scrapped. That's what the public hearings in the parliament are supposed to do, to talk about, like with this particular law. Parliamentary and presidential elections being extended from 5 to 7 years. Parliamentary elections scheduled for 2028 being delayed to 2030. President whose second and final term is due to end in 2028, remaining in office till 2030, and the new parliament electing the next president. Gloria, your thoughts on this?
Okay, so at the end of the day, it boils down to what the people want. As it relates to Zimbabwe, I am not, I'm being very careful here, because is this what the people want? I think that's, at the end of the day, that's all it boils down to. I mean, about what the people want. But at the same time, you also have the Constitution that's supposed to, help put things in order. When you have the executive arm of government, so the president in this case, coming out and making certain decisions that are unconstitutional, because that's exactly what this is, or you're coming to try to tweak the Constitution. We've seen how that has actually happened in the West, to where you basically turn things upside down because of what might look like your own interest. Mm-hmm. And in this particular case, it is concerning because ZANU-PF has been in power, as you mentioned, since 1980. Independence was in 1980, and at the end of the day, the people have had to deal with this one style of government. At the time, Zimbabwe operated under a Westminster-style parliamentary system. They had a ceremonial president, they had a prime minister, but following the intense conflict known as, I hope I don't butcher this word, Gukurahundi, that conflict, after that, during that conflict, the ruling ZANU party moved to consolidate power through the 1987 constitutional amendment. And to now have somebody in power, I mean, there are mixed reactions around, what was his name? The former president of Zimbabwe. Oh my goodness, what's his name? There are mixed reactions around him. It's on the tip of my tongue. There are mixed reactions around how he led the people. There are people who would tell you he didn't do well for the people, and there are people who would tell you he was a great president. A lot of things are happening now in history where people are looking at things through different lenses. But I am a little concerned, really concerned about
Mugabe, by the way, Robert Mugabe.
Thank you, Robert Mugabe. I'm very concerned by what's going on with Mnangagwa's presidency, even from the election they had, which some people would say was free and fair. I don't think it was free and fair. That's my opinion, at least based on the observation that I had. But yeah, again, are you going based on the Constitution, or is this just to serve your own interest?
Yeah, and keep in mind, this wasn't as viral as Ibrahim Traore's comments, right? And it's one of those things where, look, Zimbabwe made the president of Zimbabwe made some statements about African sovereignty and how everything he does is not based on what America wants. If you remember that interview with Tucker Carlson, but there are some deals in place with Western countries also, as they have deals. So they have a pretty good relationship with the United States. They have a good relationship with other nations. I think it's interesting that, again, the scrutiny is put on specific individuals and not all individuals that fall under this umbrella. And this is someone who was actually elected president, but obviously, as you can see, making adjustments to the Constitution. And then for those who are watching, right, because I don't know if everybody's like truly thinking about what a Constitution does, and the idea of the Constitution, because so many people reference it from a high level, and then just like, generally a Constitution is just meant to keep a thread of normalcy regardless of who is in power. Right? The idea of the Constitution is a framework to live by as a ruling governing body, regardless of what political party comes in and out, if there are new political parties, if they combine political parties, all of those things are meant to be governed by this Constitution. That's kind of the framework in which everything operates based on. Now, many countries have processes for how they adjust and amend the Constitution. The United States has many amendments to the Constitution, right? The first one is freedom of speech. That wasn't accounted for when the Constitution was originally written. Now, when Gloria is referencing the Constitution, the reason why she's referencing that is because it usually talks about term limits for presidents and things like that. When you see changes being made, not to the Constitution, but just making changes to Parliament, you start to wonder if there was even a need for a constitution in the first place. Were they really ever following the constitution? Was this just something that they wanted to put in place so that they can be a part of the United Nations? Right? These are the kinds of questions that you have to ask yourself when constitutions are not being followed within a country. But you guys can all ask yourselves that questions, and you guys tell me what you think. Good point that Jada is making here. Ibrahim Traoré with good intentions is going to set a bad precedent for other presidents on the continent. Possibly so. I mean, I think he's not the first, and he won't be the last military leader. In fact, there were other coups and/or revolutions, depending on how you describe them, across other countries since Traoré has taken power in Burkina Faso. And I will say that there are differences in opinions on how the people feel in those nations. There's another country in West Africa that had a coup after, if I'm not mistaken, after Ibrahim Traoré had taken power, and that's in Guinea. It doesn't get talked about much because there hasn't been a coalition with other countries. There hasn't been a lot of discussion about the West from their leadership. But yeah, I mean, look, what's happened a lot is when you have when you have conflict within the country, violent conflict, and the leadership for extended time doesn't do anything about it, many people start to look for military to rule, to be able to protect them. And so you may find that other countries will attempt to do the same thing, utilizing the same rhetoric that Traoré does, because we've actually kind of seen some of that in recent years in other parts of Africa. I'm not going to speak to specific countries when they had military takeovers. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point that Jada makes there, is that other people who don't have good intentions for the country may do that. I think, Fresh Lesh is saying the AES is a good example of African Union removing Western exploitation. And then Jada has another point. Democracy might not be good for Burkina Faso, but Sierra Leone definitely needs a democracy. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to jump into any specifics on Sierra Leone. It is my country of origin. Well, at least the most recent generations of my family. That's a conversation for another time. But I will leave that alone. I won't jump into any thoughts on what the political system should be in Sierra Leone. But I will say, this just shows the hypocrisy in Western media and in general around the belief system about what should be okay and what shouldn't be okay, because this doesn't get reported on. Now, even or at the same level. Now, there's another story in the same realm, and that is to our friends right next door to Nigeria, Cameroon, where the Cameroon votes to create a vice president post. And so this past Sunday, Cameroon's parliament, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, approved the bill creating a position of vice president despite protest by the opposition. So why would the opposition protest the idea of a vice president? So let's play the video and we'll have some more commentary on the other side.
Cameroon's parliament on Saturday approved a bill creating the position of a vice president despite protests by the opposition. 200 lawmakers voted in favor of the text, while 18 rejected it. 4 votes were declared invalid. Debate on the constitutional amendment had only started on Thursday in the capital Yaoundé. Veteran opposition leader Maurice Kamto had called the bill an attempt at a power grab in an address on Friday. According to the text, the vice president would take over in the event of the president's death, resignation, or incapacity, with no obligation to hold elections. President Paul Biya, who won re-election controversially last October, is 93. Supporters of the amendment say the move would strengthen institutional stability.
Paul Biya, 93, won re-election, and the vice president can take over as president if he becomes incapacitated or moves on from this plane while in office. Gloria, I know you have some updates here and some thoughts. Please share.
Yeah, vice president being the son, right? Surprise, surprise. See, when Traoré makes the comments he makes and people are shocked, it's because of examples like this one. It's the African Game of Thrones, as I like to call it. Biya knows that he will not be on earth for eternity. He might be closer to the end than the beginning. And I say might be, maybe he'll just live to 300, who knows? The way he's going, right? You'd think he'd live till 300 at least. But he knows the clock is ticking, as it is on all of us. And he has decided to just ensure that he leaves the monarchy in good hands. And by good hands, I mean his son. He wants to ensure that leading Cameroon remains in the family. So when he gets called to whichever home he shall be going to, the son will automatically take power, as has been the case in certain parts of Africa. Gabon comes to mind, make noise. And now the son is basically going to take over the throne. This is the issue with this so-called democracy in Africa. Y'all want to be, do you want to be democratic or do you want to be military? And when I say military, I even hate that I use that comparison. I take that back, because at the end of the day, as you referenced, Joe, and as we've said time and time again, y'all have really given the military a good name, because back in the day, you would not dare ask for a military dictatorship. But now you have citizens praying for the military to take over. This is one of the reasons the so-called democracy is a failure.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, that was exactly what Ibrahim Traoré was talking about, right? It was like it couldn't have been timed more perfectly, right? He's because he was speaking about democracy in Africa and Western aligned democracy. But look at how we see two examples in the last week. One, the parliament gets to decide, right? In Zimbabwe, we just saw that the parliament gets to decide who becomes president. Then they also are extending presidential terms for the person that's currently in power in his last couple of years in office. Then you have another example of Paul Biya, 93, who went viral for flatulating on stage a couple of years back and not knowing where he was and who he was talking to, who just won another election last October, controversially as mentioned, now is stating that we're going to institute a vice president. And by instituting this vice president, we are also now saying that this vice president will be his son and does not have to have elections. I think that's exactly what Ibrahim Traoré was talking about. But nobody is talking about this nuance to what Ibrahim Traoré was talking about. They were just talking about the statement that he made. But this is exactly what he was talking about. But we don't see a ton of news outlets talking about this on the continent or otherwise, right? I mean, these two stories that came out this week, the two stories we just did post, after the Ibrahim Traoré story, it was hard to find specifics from the large news outlets. You find some of the Africa-focused guys, mentioning these things, but the bigger news outlets are not covering this. But everyone covered what Ibrahim Traoré said. Very few people covered some of these other African leaders said, because again, it's not about what they're saying, it's about who's saying it. So with that, we'll move on to a more positive story, back to West Africa, to the country of Ghana, where Ibrahim Mahama, who is President John Mahama's brother, who happens to be, they usually say he's a billionaire, but he's a multi-millionaire in USD, is turning one of his private jets into a national air ambulance, which I think is important for the fact that, airlifting people out of a country to go to a specialist to do something, to fix something, whatever needs to happen. And you need to have, helicopters aren't always as fast as a plane can be, right? And so we'll play this video and then we'll have some commentary on the other side. All right, so it seems to be that there is no commentary on this video, but you guys got the idea. This is the flight that is going to get worked on. Let me give you guys some more context for this story. There was a longer story that the Ghana Web discussed, so I want to take you to their story, and so that you guys can hear directly from them on exactly what is being done with this private jet. So give me a second to just pull it up. But yeah, so as I was stating though, the main thing is, you know, one of the challenges we have on the continent is when there is a certain type of accident or life-threatening illness that requires a specialist in another location, it is very difficult to get them from one location to another. I had a family friend who was airlifted at one point in time from Sierra Leone to South Africa, and it was in a helicopter ride, and it was a helicopter ride all the way from Sierra Leone to South Africa. It's a long ride, and a lot of things can happen with that kind of when you have an emergency like that. You need to get to places faster to be able to really address what it is sooner. And so I'll give you guys some more details. So on the 3rd of April, the private jet of Ghanaian businessman Ibrahim Mahama departed Accra International Airport. It's no longer called Kotoka International Airport. Accra International Airport to be converted into a national emergency air ambulance. The donation follows Mahama's recent acquisition of a new jet. So I guess this is his older jet. So the plane undergoing a conversion is a 604 model. He has bought a 6500 model jet. And the conversion scope, the aircraft has been flown abroad to be routed with advanced life support systems and medical care equipment. Its intended use, once returned, it will serve as a free emergency service for all Ghanaians requiring urgent local and international medical evacuations. The philanthropic motivation is saying that Mahama stated that the decision was driven by the need to improve national healthcare response times, particularly for patients in remote access areas, those needing specialized care abroad. The project aims to supplement Ghana's existing emergency infrastructure by providing rapid response capabilities that are often hindered by ground traffic or distance. Information regarding the exact timeline for its operational return has not yet been disclosed, but that is the update and the story as of now. So with that, Gloria, your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, so I do want to point out that Ghana, as we all know, has been in the news for a lot of stuff. Two big stories, especially, obviously, they're championing the transatlantic slave recognition as one of the gravest crimes in history. That was major. And of course, on the other hand, the security pact that was signed with the EU, and that was also, that one was really controversial. So there are people obviously who have mixed feelings about Ghana right now. I do believe that, and I think I said this last week, that our leaders will not always get it right, but I like to see things that do look like they're at least trying for the people. But I do want to point out that there are two lenses that people are looking at this particular story through. Some actually see it as a landmark act of corporate social responsibility. You're basically helping, you're donating your assets. That's major. And, people appreciate that. And, as you pointed out, having to airlift someone from Sierra Leone to South Africa and things like, to be able to just ensure that people's lives are taken care of. Healthcare is urgent throughout the continent. So for someone to donate an asset is actually a big deal. Sure. On the other hand, it's making people question, what the government is supposed to do in terms of even for national dignity. You know what I mean? Like, can we have our own government come up with, it as fund, however they want to fund infrastructure to where air ambulances can actually be funded directly by the government, in which obviously people are paying taxes and they would like to see how their taxes are being used. So, I mean, if it's just a donation, in addition to what the government does plan to do, if that's going to be part of the fleet that the government will be providing, then I'm okay with it. but we don't want a reliance on somebody's. It even also blurs the line, when you're talking about transparency and accountability in government. Yeah. Keep your assets, that's your family. I get it. I do appreciate it. Don't get me wrong, but we want to make sure that that's not the only asset that's been added. Can we get more of such and just ensure that the people of Ghana have fleet and people, healthcare is prioritized?
Yeah. So to Jada's point, I think we're just, mentioning this story, and I think you gave a couple of good angles there. Yeah, and I'll also start with Jada's second point, which was rich people used to be philanthropists. It just came with the gig. I do think one of the things that we have to be very clear on is most of the philanthropists that we are aware of, the philanthropy was done so that we can be aware of them, right? It wasn't necessarily done out of the kindness of their heart. I mean, libraries and schools are named after people. Grants are named after people who were terrible in the things that they did in business, but because they had philanthropic efforts, they're seen differently. Up until the the new files that were released about people doing things with people of a certain age who went to jail and was unalived, there were presidents of companies, founders of companies, Bill Gates, for example, who was able to launder his image of what he was as a CEO. Most people don't remember what he was as a CEO of Microsoft in the 90s because he had been in philanthropy since like 2000, 2001, when Rich Ballmer, who now is the owner of the Clippers, took over Microsoft. So people don't remember what Bill Gates was the president of his company, but there was a lot of anti-competitive tactics. There were a lot of things that were done. There were a lot of things said about him, and he was able to launder his image because he became friendly with Warren Buffett, and he was able to show a different side of him. Now, many people have all kinds of conspiracies and thoughts about what he's doing in Africa, but what I'm saying is he was able to launder his image for a long time. Think about all the names the Rockefellers, the Dale Carnegie, or the Carnegies, and all these other people. The names that we have as like philanthropists from back in the day that did all these things, these grants are named after. Go back and look at how they ran their businesses and what people thought at that time, and the government breaking up a lot of their businesses and a lot of things that were happening at that time. It's just that over time you forget, and all you remember is their family name because they have a philanthropic arm to what they do. So now, with that being said, I'm not saying that that's what Ibrahim Muhammad is doing. I'm just speaking to this particular comment about philanthropists used to always do this stuff. It came with the gig. Now, I do believe that those who are rich or wealthy can do whatever they want with their income, right? That's technically, they're allowed to do that. We expect, though, that they do more with it, right? But we also expect the governments to do a lot more with the income they have, right? Now, I will say, for example, I don't want to be specifically critical of the Ghanaian government because we have seen they have done some things, right? Like, for example, there was a large outstanding bill to pay for electricity, and they paid it all in one fell swoop. And that doesn't happen often. There are countries nearby that haven't done that. They still have $40-something million in debt to their debtors when it comes to electricity in those countries. Won't speak to any specifics right now. So, I do think that, as I heard one Ghanaian said when I was on my way to the airport the last time I was there, of course, we are aware of the progress we've made as a country, but it doesn't mean we have to be complacent. We can always want more. And so I'll just think about what he said and say, we can always expect more, right? I mean, this is great that this one jet is available or will be available, but ideally we'll hope to see more of that. We hope to see more funding around that. And also, hopefully there'll be more funding that goes into the hospital systems and the medical systems in Ghana, so people don't need to be airlifted as often to other places where there are other people who are specialists that can handle some of these complex surgeries in these cases of emergency. Ideally, we don't have to utilize it that much for international travel, maybe for domestic travel within country, right? That's the ideal scenario. So we'll see what comes of it. Okay. Moving on to the next couple of stories. In the interest of time, there's a couple of stories, and we're back on third-party country deportations. We're going to talk about two different countries, Uganda and the DRC. So the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is expected to accept third-party deportees from the U.S. under a new deal. They signed an agreement with the Trump administration to accept what they call third-party deportees from the U.S. So that's going to be starting this month. Individuals from various parts of the world, many of whom reportedly possess U.S. court orders protecting them from being returned to their home countries due to safety risks, will be flown to a temporary reception facility in Central Africa. While the DRC government insists the deal carries no cost to the national treasury, of course, they actually probably will gain money from it, because usually the United States or a country that does these third-party deportees pays the country who's accepting them. And DRC has also mentioned that it respects its sovereignty rights. Groups, of course, raised their alarms. Critics question how the nation, already grappling with a brutal internal conflict and millions of its own displaced citizens, can safely house international migrants, which is a good point, because that is a question that people are trying to answer. So with that, we'll play this video and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Hello and welcome. Our top story is from the Democratic Republic of Congo. DRC has signed a new deal with the Trump administration. It is the latest African nation that has agreed to take in deportees from the US. Now, these are third country deportees. This means people from other parts of the world will be flown from the US to Central Africa starting this month. Now, you might wonder why a country already facing a raging conflict in the East would say yes to this. The answer comes down to who is picking up the tab. The Democratic Republic of Congo says this deal won't cost them anything. Instead, the US is taking on the full burden.
The DRC will implement, as of April 2026, a temporary reception facility for nationals of third countries as part of a partnership with the United States. This mechanism, with no impact on the public treasury, is in line with respect for national sovereignty, security requirements, and the country's international commitments.
Washington is paying for the planes, the travel, and all the logistics to move these people across the globe. Rights groups are deeply worried. They are asking some tough questions. How can a country that is already struggling to take care of millions of its own displaced people safely house migrants from other continents? Now, critics have also pointed out a major legal red flag. Some of the people being sent away actually have court orders from US judges saying they shouldn't be sent back to their home because it's too dangerous in their countries. Now, according to a report released recently by the Democrats, the Trump administration has spent at least $40 million to deport about 300 migrants to countries other than their own. By sending them to a third country like the DRC instead, critics say the US is just finding a loophole to get them out, regardless of the risks.
All right. So temporary, meaning they can be shipped to another country. Just want to make sure that that was clarified there. Doesn't necessarily mean they will be housed permanently in the DRC, but the question is where they would go if they're not going to be housed permanently in the DRC. But your thoughts, Gloria, on this story?
Yeah, and of course, we're seeing the evolution, and America has been in the news a lot since Trump came in regarding so the evolution of safe third country. We're seeing it all play out. Of course, we'd had countries in the Americas and European nations like the United Kingdom in its dealings with Rwanda, for instance. You know, having this was in the news a lot back in the day, but it wasn't as often as what we're seeing now.
Right.
This deal with the DRC is actually distinct because you're having TCR, third country removals, where people are expelled to a nation that they have never set foot in. And of course, and Joe, I don't know if we're going to get to the Uganda story. Of course, with Uganda, there's also a similar agreement going on that was just concluded just this month. So to have the DRC as part of a growing list of at least 8 African nations that are going to be the dumping ground, as I have labeled it, because that's precisely what it is. I mean, on one hand, the Congolese government is likely seeking to solidify its position as a primary regional ally to the US. They're probably looking for security assistance. They probably want favorable terms in mineral trade negotiations. But for Trump's administration, you're basically using African nations to handle your interior enforcement that your courts often delay. So my own thing at the end of the day, I'm always about the dignity of African nations. I don't like when our governments seem desperate enough to sign. It's not just every deal that you get from the US that is great for Africa, at the very least for the dignity of Africa. But anyway, I guess the people of Congo are, I mean, the government in Congo thinks it's a great idea. But of course, there are concerns around these people. When you dump these people in these countries, where there's no family, there's no language skills, there are no legal protections, what is that going to really look like? You're basically putting vulnerable people at extreme risk.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, to your point, they were either seeking asylum or refugee status in many cases. And so part of that says that and many of them are in process, right? We're not necessarily talking about people who didn't attempt to go through the process. We're just talking about the fact that the United States is now declaring that they don't believe that many of these people who are going through the process, they have legitimate concerns. And so the United States is saying, because the law says we can't send you back to your country of origin, we will pay someone else to take you, and then they can figure out what to do with the quote unquote problem, right? And so to your point, we heard this happen, attempted between the UK and Rwanda 2 prime ministers ago, if I'm not mistaken. But the issue there was that the people of the UK actually did not like that decision. And I think some of the people of the Rwanda also didn't. And that deal actually never came to fruition. However, when it comes to what's been happening with the United States, I think we've now named 5 or 6 countries on the continent of Africa that have now agreed, or it's between 3 and 5 countries in Africa who have agreed to take these people. And also temporary protective status is being removed for many countries as well. So then that moves people into this realm who can be deported as well, right? Because what the United States has done is they have this thing called temporary protective status. Yeah, TPS, or temporary protective status, that allows someone to be protected under that kind of it's kind of like a blanket statement for a country generally, because there's so much conflict happening in a country. The United States has said, you know, we will allow you guys to come to our country and assimilate, etc. But now a few countries are being removed from the list of temporary protected status, which means people will begin to fall into these categories, which means they may end up in these third-party countries because they won't be able to go back to the country of origin.
Did you see Jada's comments?
Yeah. So a couple of questions. Captured people being sent to where they've never been, and what are they going to do for a job? I think that's the point. I think the United States is saying they don't care, right? They're basically saying it's not their problem. Now it's the third party country's problem. She also had another thought on this. I'll just let you guys read that. I won't respond to that. I can't. And then lastly, Frankie's saying this is crazy. No African country needs to do deals with the West. The West needs Africa. Ibrahim Traoré needs to take over the whole continent. Well, that's an interesting point, Frankie. That's Frankie's thoughts. Those are your thoughts, guys. So now there's one more video that we can play. Well, no, in the interest of time, I guess we can't play it and give some commentary. I would just speak to the U.S. government also deported 20 individuals from various African countries to Uganda, making the first such transfer under the migration agreement signed last year between Washington and Kampala. Uganda's foreign ministry confirmed in a statement that the first group arrived on Wednesday after the U.S. judge approved their case. So this is a larger group. So this is 20 people. If you guys might remember, Ghana took about 6 people that were West African last year, and a few other countries took some folks. I think Rwanda actually ended up doing a deal, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if they ended up taking some people. It's now escaping me who got sent where and who's actually done the deal and actually got some people sent to them versus who's done the deal and there's expecting some. But 20 migrants were sent to Uganda. So in the interest of time, I think what we'll do is we'll draw this live stream to a close. Look, guys, what we're trying to do here is make sure that you guys are aware of what's happening on the continent. Many of you have been interested in visiting, moving, or investing. And I think it's important to have a clear and a nuanced view of what's happening on the continent so you can be informed before you do any one of those things, right? Visit, move, invest. You can be informed. We, as much as possible, try to get the stories that we think are the most important ones. We do talk about the news around Africa, and we tend to put those in the descriptions as much as I can so that you guys can do your own research and look up some of these articles and these stories. So hopefully you guys found this useful. Thank you to you guys who participated today. Definitely want to hear from you guys in the comments on what you think about the hypocrisy between how people covered Ibrahim Traoré and others. Before we go, Gloria, any final thoughts?
Thank you all so much for tuning in, and hope to see you next week.
Awesome. And with that, guys, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share this with anybody who's interested in news on the continent. With that, guys, thanks for watching. See you all on the next live stream. Bye, guys.
Bye.